Guys, welcome back to this week's episode of Unleash Your Inner Greatness. And I'm really excited to introduce you to this week's guest. Neale Donald Walsch is an American actor, screenwriter, speaker, and well-known author of the incredible book series Conversations with God, and more recently, the inspiring book, The Essential Path. And his writings are some of the most profound in the spiritual and self-help genre, which have had a positive impact on millions of lives, including my own. It's an absolute privilege and honor to have him on the show this week. Neale, welcome to Unleash Your Inner Greatness.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you to have me, and thank you for that very sweet introduction.
It's a real pleasure to have you on. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to ground you in a really great place to start with, and just ask you what you're most grateful for in your life right now, and what has been the highlight of this year for you.
Well, gosh, what I'm most grateful for in my life right now is probably the opportunity that my conversations with God has given me to make a contribution to the planet, frankly, without wanting to sound grandiose, but make a contribution to the planet that I have direct evidence has produced wonderfully positive outcomes, as you just said, in the lives of several million people. And I'm very grateful for that, because a life that's filled with meaning is a life that's filled with joy and peace as well, and serenity. So that's the thing I'm most grateful for in my life, and in this most recent time. To say nothing of my wife, who I'm also very grateful for, because I don't know that what I've accomplished here and what I'm experiencing in my life would be experienced in the way that it is without her constant support and presence for me in my life. What was the second question? You just asked it, but I forgot it already.
That's all right. And what was the highlight of this year for you?
The highlight of this year, interesting, because it's been I think the highlight of this year was stepping in front of an audience of well over 2,000 people in Paris to deliver this message. I honestly didn't expect that kind of a crowd. I thought we might have 500 or 600 people there, maybe 700. When I was backstage and I said, "What do we have out there?" 600 or 700. The sponsor said, "Oh, no. It's well over 2,000, probably 2,300 or 2,400 people."
Wow.
And I don't want to sound like I'm bragging about it, but I was actually shocked, that the message, which the books came out 25 years ago, so the message is still resonating a quarter of a century later with people far across the ocean from where I live on the west coast of the United States. So that would probably be the highlight of my year. And if it wasn't that, it would be the publication of The Essential Path, my most recent book, back in June. And again, a little bit of a surprise, honestly, because I'm a little bit overpublished. I've had like 37 books published. So when I wrote my 38th book, I thought no one's going to publish this, only because I'm overpublished, frankly. You can get a lot of books with my name on the cover. So I thought, no one's going to want to do this, but I put it out there just to see, because I think it was an important enough book to write. And I think it's an important book for people to read. So in fact, it was picked up by publishers actually in 4 countries: in the United States, in the UK. Watkins published it in the UK, published in Germany, and in Italy. So we picked up four publishers so far, and others are in the queue. So I'm a bit surprised and happy about that as well. And that's been a major event as well for this past year.
That's amazing. And we'll get on to the book. It's it definitely, I have read it and taken away some notes. And what I want to do is obviously honor your work and your story. But for those who don't perhaps know you, Neale, would it be possible to, take us back to perhaps your humble beginnings and let the audience know, for those who don't know you, a little bit about sort of how you got to where you are today?
Well, of course. In brief, my life was going, pretty well for the most part. I have to say, I had some early success in my. I mean, not major, major success that I would be known, widely known, but in my own personal life, I had some good work, good jobs. I had a job in broadcasting starting when I was 19 years old. Then I had a job in newspaper work, and I wound up becoming the managing editor of the newspaper that I worked for. And so I was largely involved in media work, but I enjoyed it, and it was a wonderful way to make a living, as they say. So I felt really good about it. But then I had an automobile accident, broke my neck. It created a lot of havoc in my life. I couldn't work for almost 2.5 years because the doctors said, frankly, that it was amazing that I survived. Most people who have a broken neck, and by the way, my broken neck was not a hairline fracture. I had a 3/4 inch avulsion fracture of the 7th cervical vertebrae posteriorly. That's a big enough hole in your neck to put a pencil through. And so the doctors were amazed that I actually survived, much less that I survived without any major paralysis. Turns out that the fracture was just by centimeters in the right place where it didn't catch the spinal cord and cause irrevocable damage, irreversible damage, or in fact, death. So I got, as they say in the business, I got away with it. But it took 2.5 years out of my life on rehab. I was walking around with a therapeutic collar for 2.5 years, and I couldn't get work anywhere because no one would wanted to hire me because I was a walking insurance claim. One wrong move, even a small wrong move, and I could refracture that neck again. So nobody wanted to have anything to do with me. I wound up living on the street. I had no income. I ran out of my benefits. The insurance company, the other person was at fault in the accident, but the insurance company, it took 2.5 years more than that to finally reach a settlement with me. In the meantime, I had run out of money, so I wound up as a street person, living literally on the sidewalk, and I wound up, for a year. That was a year of my life, not a few weeks or a bad summer, but for the entire year. And it was a very interesting experience to live on the sidewalk as a street person for one solid year of my life. So that brought me to where I am today in the following way. After that event, I finally worked my way off of the sidewalk. I got a small little job at a tiny little radio station that was willing to hire me, and my neck had healed, sufficiently that I was no longer a threat to anybody's insurance claim. So I got a little job, and I made a little money, and I wound up in a little apartment. But I was now 50 years old, 49 years old, and I threw up my hands one night, and I said to God, "Okay, what do you want from me? What is it that you need?" Because I've played the game. I obeyed most of the rules. I did it right for the most part. I cheated a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I played by the rules, and I was a nice guy. And what have I done wrong? What have I done to deserve all of this that's happened to me in my life? And I was writing it out on a paper just to get it out of my system. It was 4:30 in the morning. I woke up and I was writing a very angry letter to God. What do you want from me? And that's when I heard a voice over my right shoulder. And the voice said, "Neale, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting?" I turned around. Of course, there was no one there. And I thought, great, now, in addition to everything else, I'm losing my mind. But I was also at the same time overcome with a feeling of peace and serenity and actually inner joy. So I thought, well, I'll just keep on writing here. And I wrote on the yellow legal pad, I am venting, but if you have answers, I'd be open to hearing them. I'd sure like to know what they are. At which time I received what I could only describe as a download, like all the answers to those questions that I had asked were given to me. And I began writing them down on the yellow legal pad just to keep a copy of them, just to have a record of it. And I never thought in a million years that anyone else would ever read this stuff. But I kept on writing and asking other questions and writing, and the answers I was being given would bring up other questions, understandably. So I began evolving myself in a question and answer dialogue, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And before I knew it, I had several dozen pages, many, many pages of handwritten notes, which I found fascinating. This was going on for 2 or 3 hours. It's now 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. I started at 4:30 in the morning, And then somewhere in the middle of this dialogue, sorry, by the way, I'm sorry to be giving you a 12-minute answer to your 30-second question, but you asked for it. But this is what happened. So I'm almost at the end of my story here. So in any event, out came the following message. It said, "This will one day become a book." I'm writing this down on my yellow legal pad. "This will one day become a book." And I thought, yeah, of course. I can just see me sending this off, these handwritten notes, to a publisher who's going to say, "Stop the presses. This guy's talking to God. We got to print this right away." And of course, it wasn't going to happen. And I realized it was not. But you know what? I sent it to a publisher as a test. I wanted to test what I was experiencing just to see if there was any validity to it at all. And I realized that the idea that this would be published by an actual publisher was one in a million, would never happen. Well, in fact, the publisher did publish it. He called me as soon as he read it, immediately, and he said, this is incredible stuff. Where did this come from?" I said, "Well, I really think I had to, kind of an inspiration from God." He said, "We want to publish this." I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "No, we're going to publish it." And they did publish it. And the rest is publishing history. It sold well over 1 million copies, wound up being translated into 37 languages, and produced 36 other books behind it, because the information kept on coming. So there you have it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's incredible. And it wasn't fraught with it wasn't fraught without rejection, though, because apparently when you first sent it, you then had to convince him to read
10 chapters.
Yeah.
I was trying to shorten the story, but when I first sent it to the publisher, his intake editor, the publisher didn't read it. They have intake editors, and the intake editor read it. He didn't even read it. He skimmed it. He skimmed over and he rejected it. He said, "Well, nothing new here." And so he sent it back. And I thought, wait a minute. He couldn't have said nothing new here if he had actually read it. So I realized, the guy was probably inundated that day. Publishers get like 20 manuscripts a week that are unsolicited, and he just probably, didn't give it much attention. So he just sent it back. He had his secretary send it back to me. He was good enough to do that. He sent it back with a note, rejecting the manuscript. I wrote a note back in it to the publisher. I called the company and I said, "Does this guy read his own mail, or does he have people who filter?" She said, No, he reads his own mail. I said, "Okay." So I sent it back, this time in care of the man who owns the company. I sent it right to him. And I said, "Hey, look, read any 10 pages. You couldn't have read this book and rejected it if you thought the same old stuff, because it's not the same old stuff. It's stuff that no one's ever said before, much of it." So he took me up on the dare. He told me the story later, of course, but he opened the manuscript. He opened the envelope with the manuscript, saw the handwritten note, "Read any 10 pages." He said, "This guy's got a lot of nerve. I'll give it a try." So he told me he flipped to 10 pages randomly, and he must have found the 10 most interesting pages, because he was on the phone within 20 minutes. And he called me on the phone. Of course, I put my phone number in the manuscript, and he called me. And he said, "We want to publish this book." I said, "Interesting, because your intake editor rejected it." He said, "Yeah, I know, but we're going to publish it." and that poor guy, after the book sold 1 million copies, that poor editor had a sign that they've made for him as a joke on his office door: "The man who rejected the 1 million seller."
There's something to be said for persistence. And
well, no kidding. I mean, really, that's a very good lesson for this particular program you're doing as well, because persistence does pay off. And my father taught me when I was 14 years old, "Son, never take no for an answer."
Yeah, it's true. And I'm grateful, because I reached out to you a long time ago, and initially the answer was no, but I persisted, and here we are. So,
There you go.
If anything, everyone who listens in, persistence is key to getting what you want. So we're going to go on to your your new book. But before I go on to that, there is a quote in Conversations with God, which I'd love to share with the audience, because it's a very powerful and transcending quote. And to be honest, Neale, I come across your work because in 2013, I actually lost my marriage. And I went through quite a deep state of, you could call it depression. I was in a really low place. And when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and your work come across my desk, and that's why I read your book. But there was a quote in there about relationships, and obviously at the time I lost mine. And the quote says, "The purpose of a relationship is to decide what part of yourself you'd like to see show up, not what part of another you can capture and hold. There can be only one purpose for relationships, for all of your life, to decide who you really are." And it's interesting because it really flows on to the new book, and the new book's title is Making the Daring Decision to Be Who You Truly Are, The Essential Path. So I was wondering, with courtesy, if I could sort of get you to give us a bit of a context around sort of the new book. And the one question I have after reading the book, which I'd love to ask you today, is what, in your opinion, is the biggest problem in the world today?
Well, it's an interesting question. The biggest problem in the world today, as I see it, is that most people don't know what the biggest problem in the world today is. We see the outfall, we see the outcome easily. Wherever we look, we can put that into one word: alienation. The world is becoming alienated from itself, and the people in the world are becoming alienated from each other. You know, along racial lines, along spiritual lines, along economic lines, along political lines, no matter how you see it, and no matter how you look at it, we're seeing ourselves being divided. You know, members of this party and that party, this religion and that religion. And I've never seen anything like it in my years. I'm an older gentleman. I'm 76, and I've never in my 30s or 40s or 50s saw anything like this. Of course, we've seen people have always had disagreements, but never at this level of anger and ugliness and retribution, even between people who disagree with each other. So I'm seeing now this level of alienation, but we don't understand, you know, the world's religious leaders, the world's political leaders, the world's economic leaders, the captains of business and industry, all those people we look to give us answers to life's biggest questions are not coming up with the answer. And nobody knows why. All of a sudden, in the past 8 or 10 years, humanity has become so alienated from itself, and we're seeing this alienation. But I think the answer is really simple and obvious. The problem in the world today is not a political problem. It's not an economic problem, and it's not a social problem. It plays itself out in those arenas, but that's not the source of the problem. The problem is a spiritual problem. We can only solve humanity's largest difficulties by using spiritual means. The problem is we think we're separate from each other. It's a basic fundamental misunderstanding about who we are and what our relationship is to each other, to life itself, and to the aspect of life that many of us call God. We think we're separate from all of it. We think we're separate from God. We think we're separate from life and from everyone else in life. We think we're separate from the planet, so we can treat the planet any way we want because it's not part of us. And we think we're separate from each other. We think that I'm over here and you're over there, and we're basically fundamentally separated from each other. Not individualized, but actually separated. And God said to me, Neale, I want you to look at your own hand. He said, you've got 5 fingers on your hand, and they're each individual. They're individuated. They're each totally different from each other. They don't look like each other. They don't have the same functions of each other. They're totally individuated, but they're not separate from the hand itself. So individuation does not mean separation. And you guys on this planet have made the mistake of thinking that because you are so highly individualized, that you are therefore separate from each other. That's been the fundamental problem. Once you understand that you are all one, that we are all one, that everything is one thing, that there's only one thing and all things are part of the one thing there is, not just philosophically, but actually organically, in a physical sense, that we are all part of the same single system and the same single energetic expression. When we understand that, we will start treating each other as we would want ourselves to be treated. We'll start treating the planet, actually, as we would want our own body to be treated. Our whole point of view about life and its purpose, its reason for being, and its opportunities would shift dramatically. So we simply have a single message that we now need to share with everyone on the planet. We are all one.
It's such a powerful message, and it's a beautiful message because we can go so further if we feel this way.
But the problem with it is, real quickly, the problem with it is people may even agree with the message. They may say, okay, I get that. Philosophically, I get that. But how does that work? How can it work economically? How can it work socially? How can it work politically? And how can it work spiritually? So that's where the rubber meets the road, as we say in America. That's where the tough part comes in, because how do we make that rise from the level of simply a wonderful philosophical statement to an expression that can be basically functional, that can be functional in everyday life? That becomes the question. And that's what the writing in Conversations with God and in this latest book, The Essential Path, brings to us. The answers as to how to, I'm going to use the word functionalize, I'm going to coin a word here. How can we functionalize? How can we render functional the enormous truth that everything is part of a single system?
And sorry, I had to duck down just then. My battery was going flat on the laptop. But in terms of, I was going to say, it's such an important message, and you mentioned something in that dialogue which was very important, and you said that faith is very important to progression and to our individual lives, and sometimes we detach from it. And I wrote a question down actually, and it was about transformation using faith. And when you were going through a difficult time, it seemed that you reverted back to faith, and you were seeking questions from a greater source than yourself. And I wanted to ask you, sort of, why do you feel that faith is so important to use for personal transformation?
Well, because it sets up an energetic. We have to understand human beings. I think people on a broad, general basis probably understand that everything is energy, but they don't understand in the specific sense the impact, the implications of that. If everything is really energy, if everything that we look at, that we see, that we hear, that we encounter, if everything in life, the entire cosmos, is nothing more than energy expressed in a certain form, that would mean that even our own thoughts are energy. And of course, we know that. We know that. Anyone who operates a polygraph understands that. The lie detector tests are nothing more than testing the energy flowing through your body when you're answering questions that the people are asking you. So I've taken a lie detector test, and I know all about that. So when we see that energy is everything, then why it's important what you think, and whether you have faith and knowing and understanding, that energetic expression is projected into the noosphere, what Teilhard de Chardin described as the noosphere, the atmosphere of everything, the whole universe, and the universe within which you move and live and have your being. So if you think that the energy that is transmitted by you doesn't affect the energy in which you live, think again. We've all known people who walk into a room and they're in a dark mood or a black mood or an unhappy mood. It changes the entire atmosphere of the room. And conversely, we know people who every time they come into the room, the whole place lightens up. Everybody brightens up. It's because of the energetic with which they move and that they project from the interior of themselves into the space all around them. And that energetic impacts the energetic of everything else in the room, like pouring hot water into a glass of cold water. Obviously, it impacts the water in the glass, and it changes ultimately the constitution of the water in the glass. So it's a simple example, but it's a very vivid one. So the energetic that you carry with you will impact the energetic of the world in which you move, which produces physicalization, or what I call manifested outcomes.
One thing that I personally do to get my energy in a great place is gratitude. I think gratitude, this is probably the most important lesson that I learnt through the demise of my marriage, and that was the lack of gratitude for my previous partner is probably what caused her to leave. But then in saying that, gratitude has also been the most transformative thing that I could use in my life to get me back to a place of happiness. So I was just wondering, how has gratitude impacted your life? And over and above gratitude, do you use anything as part of your daily rituals to also bring forward a great energy to your surroundings?
Yes, yes. But let me answer your first question first. Gratitude. How I use gratitude in my life is to allow myself to notice the impact that gratitude has. Once again, gratitude is nothing more than a state of mind. It's an energetic projection, and and it's a positive energetic projection as opposed to a negative energetic projection. So when I allow myself to experience gratitude for all the events of my life, even the unwelcome events, even the events that I might have wished didn't happen, but when I say thank you, God, for allowing me to notice that this event is going to serve me and probably is at some level serving me right now. So thank you, God. Then it's like throwing, chocolate syrup on top of vanilla ice cream. What was good gets even better.
Yeah.
And it shifts the entire energetic of the equation. That's why I use gratitude as a powerful device. What was your second question?
It's really powerful. And then I was going to ask as well, in terms of, other things that you do in terms of your daily
Oh yeah,
habits
yeah.
to
Thank
bring
you. Yeah,
forward
yeah,
good
yeah.
energy.
I've got short-term memory loss.
That's all
It's really fascinating. I get so caught up in my present answer, I can't remember the other
right.
question. It was literally a minute and a half ago, but apparently I have a 90-second memory span these days, so that's okay. But I'm grateful for it, that I don't have to remember all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I do have some tools, honestly, and there are two that I call my magic questions. The magic questions are these: whenever I'm looking at anything in my life, whether it's I'm having a little tiff, a little argument, a little quarrel with my beloved partner across the room, or something major like I've lost my job, or anything in between, the big stuff and the small stuff. What should I watch on the telly tonight? What or should I accept that invitation to the cocktail party? Whatever is going on, I take a look at it and I ask myself the following question. Now, what does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? And wait a minute, what does that have to do with the agenda of my soul? See, what I'm doing here is I'm recontextualizing the event that I'm observing, the energy that's coming at me, and the choices and decisions that I'm invited to make as a response to those events. So to use my prior example, if my wife and I are having a little bit of a morning tiff over coffee and it's not going so well, if I stop myself and I don't do this out loud, it's a private thought in my mind, but I think to myself, wait a minute, what does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? What does this little argument I'm having with my wife and I right now have to do with the agenda of my soul? And the answer will be given to me immediately. And when I begin to use what's now occurring to serve that larger agenda of the soul, almost 95% of the time, the challenge, the difficulty, the negativity disappears. It's incredibly healing and very powerful because it returns me to the person I choose and know that I want to be. The second question that I ask myself, that's what I call my second magic question, is what am I seeing over there that I'm seeing over here as well? What am I looking at over there that I also see over here, but I'm denying it over here, so I'm angry about it being over there? So what I've noticed is that nobody has demonstrated any behavior in my life, ever actually in the entirety of my life, that some version of, maybe a small version, but some version of hasn't been demonstrated by me in my life as well. And so I've come to a clarity that I don't have to forgive anyone for anything in my life anymore. Understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. Remember that and put it on your bathroom mirror and hold it as your highest truth for the rest of your life. Put it on the mirror in the bathroom. Understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. When we can understand how a person could behave and say and do the things that they're doing, then we come to a new place of being able to deal with it from an entirely different energetic. So those are powerful tools that I have come to use in my life, and they have made a huge, huge difference in my day-to-day experience.
Because generally when you experience something, you can relate to another person's situation. So if you haven't experienced it yourself, the one question I was going to ask, following on from that, is how could you understand if you haven't experienced it yourself? Is it being more?
There's no experience that somebody hasn't demonstrated that I haven't experienced myself at the level at the fundamental level of energetic feeling. I'm not talking about doing the same thing, but
Right.
for instance, we're not talking about actual events like, killing someone or stealing somebody's life savings. I've never done that. But I have felt the urge to take what's not mine. I'd like to talk to the person in my whole life who's never, ever once ever felt the urge to take something that didn't belong to them.
Yeah.
So what I can, but you see, the difference is that when I feel those feelings, when I have those energetic experiences, I'm justified. I'm always justified. It's only when they do it that it's not justified. So what I notice is, I haven't come across a single person or event that someone hasn't shown me that I haven't found the energetic basis for in my own life. So then I can understand, wait a minute, how could a person do such a thing? I've even felt, honestly, twice in my life, I've actually felt murderous rage. Now, I didn't actually murder anybody. I didn't actually kill anybody. But do I know what it feels like to be so angry, so upset, so beside myself that I was ready to end someone else's life? You bet. When I found out that one of my former wives, God bless her, she's no longer with us on the planet, but one of my former wives was having an affair with her boss. And when I found out about it, I went to his house at 11 o'clock at night, banging on the door. And I would have, I don't know what I would have done, but it wasn't going to be good. I don't know what I would have killed him, but I was really, 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 really angry. Thank goodness that he called the police. And the police came and said, okay. And they understood. It was a guy. He said, hey, I get it why you'd be angry, but you can't do this. We can't let you do this. And he pulled me away and he arrested me for disturbing the peace. Well, my God, it was the greatest thing that ever happened because I came to my senses. But I'm trying to say that, by the way, let me be clear. This doesn't condone it. This doesn't mean I agree with it. This doesn't make it okay that people do those things. But it does make it understandable. How could a person do such a thing? And understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master, which is why when God welcomes us back home, she doesn't judge us. Judge and neither condemn. She just says, welcome back. You made some mistakes and you made some pretty big ones. Some of you have made some pretty big ones, but none of you have made a mistake big enough for me to not allow you to come back home. There's no such place as hell. There's no such thing as condemnation. Welcome back. You'll have a chance to go back another time and do better next time. But we're not going to condemn you here for being such a young species that you didn't know how to control the worst impulses. Next time you go back and express the better angels of your nature. I could, be wrong about all of that. I'm the eternal optimist, and I have all these wonderful high level thoughts, and I got to tell you, I could be wrong about all of this, but I don't think so.
I don't either. I think it's true. You can't come back to that place, and that place is a position of love for oneself, because even if you have made mistakes in your life, essentially, I think that's what God wants us to come back to. And one question I did write is, I think self-esteem and self-love, for much of a better word, even though us males find it difficult to speak about self-love, I think it's very important, and it's very important for both personal success and business success. I believe that if you love who you are, you can treat other people with more dignity and respect.
But what's interesting? I hear that, and I don't disagree with it. But in my life, I've worked it in reverse.
Okay.
See, what I've learned in my life was, since loving myself was so hard for me, just as you pointed out, particularly with my male, genes and all the rest of that stuff going on.
Yeah.
But I thought, what if I reversed the process? What if I took it upon myself to see if there was a way that I could love everybody else, and not only love everybody else, but increase increased the level of the love that I felt for other people, and demonstrably increased the level at which I showed that love, the way I demonstrated that love? What if I made it my life mission to simply fall in love with everyone, and even those I disagreed with? I even began to practice, is there a way that I can disagree with somebody politically, economically, socially, religiously, spiritually, philosophically? Is there a way that I can disagree with somebody, even have a major disagreement, and still be able to shake their hand and say, you know what, we're all in the same boat here, buddy. You've made some choices and made some decisions I wouldn't make, but I'm not going to condemn you for it. I'm going to love you. Let me tell you a quick story here. Pope John Paul, I believe it was Pope John Paul II, was shot in Rome a few years ago, many years ago, and when in a motorcade, and they grabbed the guy. He was shot 6 times, by the way, not once, 6 times. And the guy shot all these rounds out, and he went to the hospital. They miraculously saved the Pope. You know what he did a month and a half later when he recovered from all those desperate wounds? He went to the jail cell of his attempted assassin, and he said, help me to understand. He said, I'm not even going to make you wrong. I just want to know, why would you do that? Because I know that you had some reason for doing that was powerful enough for you to do something that you must have found aberrant at the deepest part of your being. Nobody deliberately wants to hurt someone unless you felt you had a really good reason. And the two of them talked for an hour and a half. The Pope left and gave the man his papal blessing and shook his hand. And he became a pen pal of this prisoner. For 6 years, they wrote letters back and forth. And finally, after serving 6 years, the Pope urged the authorities in Italy to release the man. He had served 6 years. The Pope said, out of mercy, give him the rest of his life back. He will make something of it, I promise you. And of course, the authorities granted the Pope's wish and gave the man a full pardon. Now, you know, this wasn't a saint walking the place. It wasn't Moses or Jesus. This is a man. He's a regular person. He happened to be Pope, but he was a regular person. But you know why he did that? He not only did that to follow the impulse of his own soul, he did that to leave an example, to say to everyone else on the planet, look, just watch this. We don't have to meet anger with anger. You cannot solve the problem of the world using the same energy that created it. Einstein made that very clear, and he was profoundly correct. You're not going to solve anger with anger. You're not going to end terror with terror. You're not going to put a stop to violence with violence. You can't do it that way. The only answer is love. I hate to sound mushy and squishy and all soft around this, but you know, the Pope knew what he was doing, and the rest of us don't.
Yeah. And would you say from that story, because that's an amazing story. I've actually never heard of that.
Oh, wow, Google it. It's out of history. It actually happened.
It's amazing. Would you say from that, you know, the source of, I mean, here's a question for you, I guess. What is the fundamental source of love?
Us. We are the fundamental source of love, and we don't know that because we are made of the same stuff that you would refer to as the fundamental source of love. The fundamental source of love in my vocabulary, in my vernacular, is of course God. But you know, that brings up the second question. Well, what is God? What is God? And I've been told that God is simply the essential essence. You might want to call it the single cell of the universe. You know, where they're talking about they can take cells now. What do they call those cells? Where they haven't divided themselves yet. Anyway, so the origin, the first cell of the universe, so to speak, the essence of that is love. And that we call that God. But God has imbued itself in everything, in every person, in everything really, in all that is made up of that essential essence that in English we call love. So that's who we are, and so we are the source of the love that resides within us, and all we have to do is release that. But the trick is to release it without needing anything in return. See, and that's not something that most of us, including myself, haven't yet fully learned how to do. To release the love, the essence of who we are, in projecting it onto others without needing anything at all in return.
Yeah. And why do you think we're attached to that notion of expecting something in return?
Because we've been taught because we've been taught, by our culture, by our ancestors, by those who raised us, because they didn't, the sins of the father shall be visited upon the sons, even unto the seventh generation. I'm sure I've taught it to my children until I began to change my mind about that, but a little late in the game. But better late than never, as my father used to say. My dad used to say, you know what, son? So old, so soon, so smart, so late. So why? Because that's what we've been taught. So the solution is to change the teaching. And the fastest way to change the teaching, by the way, is not to pontificate about it, not to go out and deliver gospels about it, not even to write books about it. The fastest way to change the teaching is to demonstrate what it is you wish to teach. Gandhi put it perfectly. Be the change you wish to see. If all of us walked around demonstrating the highest thoughts we ever had about life, about each other, and about God, the world would change virtually overnight.
It's one of my favorite quotes. Be the change you wish to see in the world. In terms of that quote, it reminds me of sort of happiness and being in a state of happiness. I have a couple of rapid fire questions that I'd like to ask you, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
I appreciate it. So my first one is sort of, what do people need to do to live a happier life?
Make someone else happy. Your life is not about you. It's about everyone else whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it.
Okay. To make others happy.
See, what goes around comes around. It's really quite simple. But if I'm focusing on me, what can I do to make my life happier? What can I do to make my life happier? But if I ask myself, what can I do to make your life happier, and yours, and yours, and yours, I promise you that my life will automatically be happier. There's no other way it can work. It's the mechanism of the universe.
To serve others.
To give to others what it is you wish to receive yourself. God said to me in conversation with God very clearly, look to see what it is you wish you had more of and supply more of it to everyone else whose life you touch. And watch what happens to your supply of it as well, because it will increase in your experience, not because you've actually had more of it, but because you suddenly realize you did. A simple example, has anyone ever come to you and asked you, a really good friend, somebody you really adore, a close friend, maybe a family member, I really need a little loan, could you give me a couple £100? I could really use some money. And you don't have much. You say, gosh, this is kind of tough. I'm really kind of low myself right now. But you reach back and say, okay, I can do this. And you give this guy, more than you thought you could spare. And you find out 2 weeks later, it made no difference whatsoever. In fact, all of a sudden, you realize you even have more to give than you thought you had. It's a simple example, but when we give away what it is we think we don't have enough of, we suddenly realize we had more than enough, even enough to give away. That's called self-realization. I could be wrong about all of this, of course.
No, let's. It makes sense. So let's stick with it. I love the answer, and people are going to learn a lot from it. So, what the next rapid fire question is: how do we live a more purposeful life?
By deciding what your purpose is. Most people don't know what their purpose is. But when you are clear what your purpose is, and I don't mean what job you're supposed to have, what your career should be, where you want to live. I'm talking about the purpose of who you really are, your soul's purpose. When you're clear on the agenda of your soul, which has nothing to do with your occupation, by the way, God's not a career counselor. So when you get real clear, okay, what am I doing here? What is the purpose? Oh, I see, I'm here on a spiritual adventure. It's not about get the guy, get the girl, get the car, get the job, get the house, get the kids, get the grandkids, get the better car, get the better job, get the best. It's not about any of that. I see, I came here for the purposes of evolving, becoming more of who I really am. If that's my purpose, I will recontextualize the experience of my life and pour everything into that picture. Suddenly, that will be my purpose for saying, doing anything, making any choice, even the choice of what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, what I'm going to watch on the telly, what book I'm going to read, or what interview I'm going to
Perfect. And you mentioned that in the book as well. You mentioned that purpose is to evolve. So I love that. And the last rapid fire question was, how do we live a regret-free life?
By understanding how you could have done such a thing, and by doing what you can to make it right for anything that you do regret. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's way back in the past. You can't do anything about it. But by understanding, by taking the same position with regard to yourself that God takes with regard to you. See, God would not condemn you for or judge you for anything or cause you to feel bad about anything. She would just simply look at you and say, you want to give that another try? You want to, in golf, we call it a mulligan. You want to take the shot over again? Okay, let's do it again. And you'll be given multiple lifetimes with which to do that. So how I've lived a life without regret is to not make myself wrong. Again, I'm not saying that I condone everything I did. I'm not saying that I agree with everything that I did. I'm not saying that I'm proud of everything that I did. But I am saying that regret is sufficient. I don't need to be guilty. Guilt and regret are not the same thing. I regret what I don't think we should try to live a life without regret, because regret is a level of consciousness that tells us, I don't want to do that again. But regret doesn't have to be disabling. We can regret without being disabled. We can just say, you know what? I'm not going to do that ever again. And I'm better for having made that decision. And let's move forward and let's continue to evolve and give myself credit for the level of at which I have evolved. And that's how I live my life, not without regret, but live your life with regrets that are managed properly and don't turn into guilt.
I'm kind of lost for words. I'm so inspired by your teachings, and it's incredible. Like just some of the wisdom that you've shared tonight will positively really shift people's mindset. I have two last questions for you, Neale, and I just want to honor your presence and your commitment to helping other people see through the other side of contemplation on these things. So thank you. Your books have been very profound, immensely profound, in terms of when you were going through a difficult time and you put pen to paper. Through that time, did you pick up any books that had a profound influence in your life?
I can't. No, at that time I did not. Largely because I was so caught up in my own difficulties. I didn't even have the wherewithal, the smarts, to pick up. So there's not another book that I would recommend from those days. But in this day and time, although I'm not experiencing great difficulty, a book that I would recommend to everybody is a book by Byron Katie called Loving What Is. Powerful, powerful book. Loving What Is. Byron Katie, Katie. Marvelous, marvelous book. And almost any book by Marianne Williamson.
Okay, awesome.
She's incapable of writing a book that doesn't have value.
Awesome. Thanks, Neale. Appreciate it. This brings me on to my last question. And I ask this of all my guests. And the last question is this. If today was your last day and I gave you a piece of paper and a pen, and you had one thing that you could write down on this piece of paper to inspire future generations to believe in their inner greatness, to believe in themselves, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to them? God
is real, and there is no separation between you and that which you call God.
Awesome. It's such a great piece of advice and an amazing way to end an incredible discussion with you, Neale. Is there any last parting words that you've got for the audience on Unleash Your Inner Greatness before sort of we cap off and finish this week's episode?
Be the source. Whatever it is you want more of in your life, whatever it might be. You want more abundance, you want more time, you want more patience, you want more love, you want more sex, you want more humor, you want more understanding, you want more friends in your life, whatever it is you want more of in your life. I was given a 3-word formula to make that happen. Be the source. Do not be the seeker. There are two places on the playing board of life that you can reside in. The place called I am a seeker. I am seeking these things. Or the place called source. I am the source of these things in the life of everyone else whose life I touch. When you become the source, it's like magic, and you see that you are a sorcerer.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This has been absolutely incredible. I'm so grateful you gave me the time, and I persisted to get you on the show. To acknowledge your time, I'll link your books in the show notes. We will, if ever in the future I'm on stage around the world, if I manage to get together 2,000 people in Australia, I'd love to have you on my stage. But I just really wanted to acknowledge and thank you. Thank you so much for the work you do. I know it's difficult, you know, I suppose you have to overcome your own fears and your own self-doubt and your own insecurities to show up in the world and to help other people. But I just wanted to really acknowledge and thank you. Just as an individual myself, picking up your book helped me through some very difficult times. So I really hope that this discussion, even if it can just change one person's life who perhaps is struggling or aspiring to be someone better, I really hope that this transcends just one individual's life, because they will then tell, you know, 2 or 3 or 10 people, and that's how we can become better conclusively. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And for all those listening, please follow. Where's the best place that they can follow you and get into your world?
Well, CWG, which is the acronym for Conversations with God, is the place to find me. The website is cwgconnect.com. CWG Connect. That's how you can stay connected with the energy. cwgconnect.com.
CWG?
Yeah, Conversations with God.
God.com. All right, awesome. And I'll put that in the show notes. So, guys, There you have it. Neale Donald Walsch, thank you so much for coming on the show. And you know what time it is. It's time to go out there and unleash your inner greatness.